Hi, everyone. Welcome to our presentation called Turning the Lens on Traumatic Brain Injury in the Criminal Justice System. I'm Caitlin Whalen. I'm joined here with Catherine Wiseman-Hakes and Lynn Turkstra. And we're going to be talking today about a film that we created in conjunction with a grant that Lynn and Catherine had received, and the use of video as a knowledge translation tool. And so we're going to talk to you a little bit about the process of creating a film and why it can be effective, and then also showing you the results that we had. Yeah, so I may do a fair bit of the speaking today, but Lynn and Catherine will be joining in. So to start, I think to style this presentation, I thought I would introduce you to something that's a big part of my life, which is the concept of the monomyth, which is a storytelling device. It's sometimes called the hero's journey. And I thought I would use this to take us through the presentation today. And you would see this in a lot of films and a lot of stories. It can be very recognizable, but it essentially revolves around some hero having a call to action, to adventure, and going from sort of a known world into an unknown world, and having trials and tribulations and learning things, having an ordeal, transforming, and then coming home with new knowledge. So with this in mind, I created this simplified version of something to take us through today, and how our video came to fruition using this style. So the first thing I thought I would do is introduce the characters in this story, which is us. So Catherine and Lynn, if you want to introduce yourselves, a little bit about your work and your backgrounds.
Sure. So thank you very much, Caitlin. And just to let everyone know, we're up here in Ontario, Canada. Some of us are in Toronto and some of us are in Hamilton. So welcome wherever you're joining us from. So my name is Catherine Wiseman-Hakes, and I'm really pleased to be here today with Caitlin and with Lynn. I am a speech language pathologist by training and a clinical neuroscientist, and I'm affiliated with McMaster University in Hamilton. And I have devoted my research over the last few years to supporting people with brain injuries among vulnerable populations. So thanks, and over to you, Lynn.
Thank you, Catherine. I am, as advertised, Lynn Turkstra. I am a faculty member at McMaster University. I'm the head of the graduate program in speech language pathology. And like Catherine, I have spent my professional career working to improve outcomes for people with traumatic brain injury, especially young people.
Great. And I'm Caitlin. I'm a filmmaker out of Toronto. My background is actually in health studies. I have a BSc, and I got very interested in using digital media and film around health education and health promotion. But while I believe in telling good stories, I believe in telling them well. So for the past little while, I've been working predominantly as a video producer, honing my skills. And so when Lynn and Catherine gave me this opportunity to work on this project, it was kind of the meshing of two worlds that was very interesting to me. So I appreciate them bringing me on, and it's been such an excellent project to work on. So that being said, the call to action in our monomyth. So the call to action is often what gets us on our journey. And so I thought, Lynn and Catherine, if you want to talk a little bit about young people with traumatic brain injury in the criminal justice system and kind of the basis for this project.
Sure. So Lynn and I were very pleased to be successful recipients of a grant a year ago from the Ontario Neurotrauma Foundation here in, obviously, Ontario, Canada. And the aim of that grant was sort of overarching to identify and support young people with traumatic brain injury, either diagnosed or undiagnosed, within the criminal justice system. Because here in Ontario, there is no such thing as screening for brain injury. There's really a lack of understanding and awareness of the prevalence of brain injury among this group of young people. We know from international statistics that approximately at least 50% of young people in the juvenile justice system have a history of brain injury. But again, that's not being recognized here. So we wanted to try and implement a screening process for all youth who come into contact with the justice system in Ontario, as well as to provide education and training about what it means to have a brain injury and how that can impact youth across the justice system. Lynn, did you want to speak a little bit more about the grant and how we came up with the concept of the video?
Sure, thank you, Catherine. So the grant is an implementation grant. And so the aim for us was to actually identify TBI screening that could be used in youth criminal justice, and then have an opportunity to get feedback from people involved in the justice system and pilot the screening. But of course, there was COVID, so everything was suspended in terms of in-person in the youth criminal justice system. So we were able to spend a lot more time and energy on training and trying to raise awareness. And that's a big part of where the video comes in. We chose a video format, well, first of all, because it's a wonderful knowledge translation medium, but also I'd had the good fortune of working with Caitlin on a previous project on intimate partner violence. And I saw what a beautiful and captivating job she could do creating a video of this type. So that's why we chose video.
That's great. Yeah, I think one thing I wanted to talk a little bit too is about video and the power of it, and kind of like the business case around why video can be really effective in your work. So just a couple points that I had here around video is, the first one is that it's everywhere. I mean, we've been seeing these large statistics that are happening right now with there was a recent article that said that 82% of global internet traffic is going to be video by next year. And people are spending upwards of 7 hours watching video per week, and half of people watch more than 5 videos a day. And so you're seeing this increased behavior around watching video and consuming information in this way. And I think bringing the type of ways that people are consuming information in their day-to-day lives into things like education and learning initiatives is really important, because you can have people consume media in ways that they're used to. Another thing is that video can be considered an ultimate storytelling device. That we know that people consume information and retain it more readily when it's based in stories. And I think that stories also allow us to bring in an emotional aspect into bringing information across, as opposed to just explaining facts. And people will more readily remember things that made them feel something, and they may share it with other people. And I think video is also really effective because it allows us to take big ideas and embed them in the real world and show people what things can look like, especially with learning initiatives. And so I think we'll see in this project kind of showing people and talking to somebody with the traumatic brain injury was very important to us, and allowed us to see things in a new way. And the other thing is that it's quite efficient with getting information across. We've all heard that old adage that, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so if you think in video, each second of video is 24 pictures. So how many pictures are in 2 minutes? And that might seem like an outlandish statement, but when you take an intersection of 1 second of a video, how much can you tell in that? And you can tell so much. What does someone look like? Where are they? What does it sound like? Is it loud? What is the music telling you? Is it funny? Is it serious? Should you be paying attention? And so you can get a lot of information across in a short period of time. And you also see research back this up, that people can, retain a lot more of a video's message than they will from text. And so I think bringing this into people's work, into your work, can be very effective for getting your information across. And so I think I just wanted to share these sort of statistics and some background to not just be to not just say that like video is cool or it's a cool tool, that it also is quite effective. So yeah, that's my background, or that's some background on video. So back to our monomyth. So we're back here. We had our call to action. We have this grant, and now we're crossing the threshold from the known into the unknown. So we're coming together as a team. And the next step is often called tests, allies, and enemies. We didn't have any enemies, but this is often when you develop a team and you start to go through your adventure. And so I'm going to call this our process. And so we're going to take you a little bit through our process of creating the pre-production of this video and getting into the design. So the first point is research. So I'm a filmmaker and I joined a team of researchers and I had to learn a lot about research. So I wanted to ask Lynn and Catherine, why did you think it was important for me to have kind of a foundation research-wise and be involved in the grant from the very beginning?
Sure. Well, one of the things that made it such a joy to work with Caitlin was the fact that she really wanted to learn and know everything she could about the issues and the problems and the challenges from an academic level, from a functional level, from an emotional level, from an impact level. And so having Caitlin join us right from the beginning, she was able to participate pretty much in all aspects of the research process, from our initial meetings around developing and identifying what's needed in training, to learning, you know, as I say, the academic knowledge, and really having a full understanding of what the challenges were. So in fact, she became an integral part of the research team, as I believe that we became an integral part of the filmmaking team.
And I would add to that, sorry, Caitlin.
No, go ahead.
I would add to that it doesn't really work if the person who is the filmmaker doesn't understand the content. So we needed Caitlin to be able to give us substantive and meaningful input. And I think you'll see when you see the video how important it was that she understood what was really important to us, and also what the real compelling issues and concerns were on this project. And I don't think you really get that if the person just reads a description of what you're working on. So I think really having her part of it was just a prerequisite for us.
I just wanted to add one other comment. When you, in the previous slide, Caitlin, when you were talking about sort of creating, you know, the whole process, and that the comment about that there was no enemy. And as I was listening to you, I thought, that's actually not true, because the quote unquote enemy that we are dealing with in this world is the fact that for most people, brain injury is a hidden disability. And it's not recognized, and it's often not taken seriously, and often not by people who are decision makers in the justice system. So I would say that in some ways we did have an enemy, and I think that, as you will see as we move forward with the film, that Caitlin did a really beautiful job of creating empathy amongst those potential enemies.
That's a good point. Thanks for sharing that, Catherine. And I think it was really great for me to be involved, like from my perspective from the beginning, because I had a really strong foundation going into the development of the film. And I think that I also felt part of the team. And so when I had any questions or concerns, things like that, it was very easy to approach the team with those things, specifically Catherine and Lynn, so that those things could be discussed ahead of time, because once you film, you know, it's a lot harder to change things. So that was really important and effective. So then on the reverse side, I wanted to talk about researchers joining a filmmaker in my process, and take a little bit through the process of pre-production and what you could expect. And I wanted to share this because I also wanted you to be able to understand things that should be thought about before approaching a filmmaker, or when you're thinking about developing a video? Like, what are some things that you want to have in mind? So this slide is actually my research folder that I had from all the articles from Lynn and Catherine to review. I do a lot of video marketing, and I don't have as much peer-reviewed research when I when I work with brands. So yeah, the design, I think this is part of the treatment, and I think I wanted to show this because this is what I like to call my creative brief. And these are the things that I was saying are really important to know going into the making of a video. So things to keep in mind. So we had, you know, what was the project description? What were we doing? What was the deliverable? This is kind of funny because I have under 5 minutes. The end video ends up being 12 minutes, but it was important that it was that, and we kind of all had a discussion and we agreed that the length was appropriate. And so that can change, but I think it's important to talk about it with whoever you're working with. What is the purpose? What are we trying to do here? The tone, this is also very important because you don't want to be expecting a serious video and then you get a funny video or a lighthearted video. So making sure you're on the same page tone-wise is very important. I think this is the most valuable part, which is knowing the key messaging. What's the messages that you're trying to get across at each aspect of the video? What are your ideal results? Who's the target audience? This is also very important with knowing your language. Things that you need to say, things you don't need to say. And then the due date, which no one expected to have a pandemic when we applied for this grant, but so the due date got extended a little bit. I have a bit more on the treatment here that I sent Lynn and Catherine, and I won't go through this too much, but this is something that you could think about, or you may get from a filmmaker to kind of understand what it's going to look like. So we talked about the interviews, how they were going to look, created a mood board, had some options for animation, motion graphics, and then some references. And I think things like this are important so that we're all on the same page with what it's going to look like, and they have no surprises. There's no surprises when the first cut of the video comes out. I think another thing that I thought was really important with this video is that we were talking about such a serious topic that I wanted it to be taken seriously, and the quality and look of the video is very important for that, because I wanted people to see it and be like, this is something I need to watch. And so felt it needed to be in line with things that they would see in their day-to-day lives when they're watching these 5 videos a day. And video is increasing in quality, and so we really wanted to be in line with that and have the seriousness of the topic be seen. And then from there, we created a storyboard with our messaging, the points that we wanted to get across, and then we found our interviewees and had a very iterative process in developing questions. And then we went into filming. So Catherine and Lynn, what was it like for you as researchers to be involved in that process?
It was fantastic. It really was. I think, as Caitlin has already, clearly stated, we all worked together. We were all part of the team. We had some wonderful students working with us. One of whom has joined us here, Sukman Bath. So thank you very much. And yeah, I really, that's all I can say, is that it was a wonderful iterative process. And we're just absolutely thrilled with the final results and the impact that it's had.
I would add that oh, sorry, Caitlin, if you just go back to the previous slide, I would add that having to come up with the key messaging for Caitlin was a very helpful process for Catherine and me. So, so for us, we live this reality. So we think about brain injury all the time. We think about the consequences in the criminal justice system all the time. But this made us really sit down and think, given who's going to be seeing this, what are the really important things that we want to make sure that people get? Because we knew we had a limited time, And we knew that Caitlin was going to be working with us to make decisions about who was going to say what, and, you know, sort of what were the key messages. And I think this also was one of the reasons that we ended up with decisions about the project in general. You know, like, what can we say that would actually change like hearts, minds, and actions in the youth criminal justice system? How could we get that balance? And what actually did we want people to change? I mean, that was something we sort of went into the project thinking, we want everyone to understand that brain injury can have profound negative consequences for a young person in criminal justice. And these are all the things we know about. What I think we hadn't thought so much about at the beginning is, why specifically would people in youth criminal justice care? So, you know, everyone wants to do the best they can, but what specifically was our ask? Mm-hmm. And so I think that having Caitlin submit this creative brief and then work with us about the messaging was a way for us to clarify what we wanted to get out of the whole project.
Yeah, agree with you completely. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too, in terms of video as like a knowledge translation tool. I think because sometimes with research, the final can be a very long report, but in video, you can't have as many words. And so it allowed us to also make a succinct list of like the key messages that we just wanted to have in the video, because the video isn't replacing anything. And I think that's another important point. Like, video as a knowledge translation tool isn't replacing the other things that are created, like reports, executive summaries, those kinds of things. But it's just another really important tool that you can use to get messaging across, or to drive more interest in this topic. So I think this was another thing that we had to I just put this up for fun. This was an inspiration we had because we were all of a sudden in COVID, and some of the people that we wanted to interview were not based in Ontario, but we still wanted to have them in the video. So we had to think of some interesting ways that we could display Zoom calls interestingly, and make sure that you didn't go from this filmed thing to a jarring Zoom recording, and how we could make that a little bit more or a little less jarring. So this was an inspiration that you'll see in the video. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was money, because I think this is really important, because to manage expectations for how much things can cost. So budget wise, you know, these are the three key aspects of creating a video. And these are where your budget goes to. You know, in the design and pre-production, there's a lot of time and expertise that go into that. In production, you know, half of your budget can go just to production. You have crew, you have equipment, location, food. We had to have PPE, extra person on set doing cleaning and those kinds of things. And then post-production, editing, animation, music, color, and sound. So for our video, our budget was $12,000. And I think for something like this, it could be anywhere from 10 to 20. So I think I just also wanted to manage expectation around how much these things can cost, especially when you're building budgets for your knowledge translation tools. And I don't think, like, if that's a scary number, I don't think it should deter you. There are other ways that you can create videos that are less expensive, and other ways you can do it. And I think that's, again, when it's important in the pre-production phase to manage expectations, look at how much money you have and what kind of film you can create.
Also, that's Canadian dollars.
Yeah. Yeah.
Should say that.
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
Yeah. So back to our monomyth. So now we're on our journey and we're halfway through, and we get to what's called the abyss or the ordeal. And this is usually the big event that happens. And so I thought this would be a good time to show the finished video. And you've seen a little bit of the pre-production that we did and the look that we were going for and the messaging we wanted to get across. And you can see how it came into the final video. So Rory, if you would like to play the link. Do I have to stop sharing my screen?
And are we going to give out the link as well in case people have trouble?
Yeah, I'll place a link in the
chat.
In the chat. Let's see. Oh, it should already be in the chat. There's a link from me to the panelists. I'm just sending that again.
I can start it whenever you're ready, Keelan.
Go for it. You can start.
I think you need to share the sound through the computer when you set up the,
Got it. One moment. Sorry about that.
Video is always a challenge.
Always.
About that. Let me know if you can hear it now.
Yes.
it's good.
The prevalence of traumatic brain injury among youth in criminal justice is staggeringly high. The estimates range from a low estimate of 30 to 40% to almost 90% when it comes to young people who've been convicted of more serious offenses.
Just because someone has a brain injury, that in of itself does not equate criminal behavior. What really most of the time is happening is that the individual lacks the diagnosis of brain injury, lacks access to appropriate supports and rehabilitation in combination with the challenges associated with the brain injury makes them at risk for justice involvement. But the two are not necessarily synonymous.
What I've seen with clients over the years is that their difficulties with attention, comprehension, social interaction can place them at risk to be singled out by the justice system as being problematic, as not being remorseful, as being defiant, oppositional, when in fact their behavior is to a large part a function of the often undiagnosed and unaddressed TBI.
Traumatic brain injury has very wide and varied impacts on communication skills. It largely has an interplay on cognition and communication. So for young people who had a brain injury who have challenges with attention or memory or their general executive function skills, might have resulting challenges with processing information. And so if long streams of information is given, maybe only parts or whole of it is understood. And it could really make a person seem like quite obstinate in giving back information. And it could definitely be interpreted as an unwillingness to attend to instructions or inability to understand what's being said.
My name is Adam Bayandik. I'm a Reiki practitioner. I had a TBI when I was 15. It's hard for me to understand sometimes and explain stuff to people, and it's really hard to figure out words sometimes, to figure out what I have to explain to somebody. Yeah, I can't remember the word or the name, so it's kind of hard for me to figure out things. Yeah. Every time my mom makes a joke, it's like I don't get it. Sometimes I'll think a joke's funny, but nobody else does. And it's like somebody will be serious to me and I'm just laughing and smiling, right? It's like it's kind of hard for me to tell when people are like really serious and stuff like that.
peer relationships are such an essential part of one's identity. And when you've had an acquired brain injury, often you almost appear to your friends like a new person. Slowly, I noticed that a lot of people lose friends because their peers just do not quite know how to deal with this new person.
They really desire a social circle. One of the greatest predictors of increased conflict with the justice system is your social circle. They will seek friends wherever they can. The fact that the friend might be somebody who has a lengthy criminal history, who gives them bad advice or asks them to do things that are illegal is not something that clients necessarily consider as being a negative. What they're looking at is the social, is I've got this friend.
So you place these challenges in the context of the justice system, which inherently is a fast-paced, highly complex system with multiple persons. It's highly stressed. It makes it very challenging for individuals with brain injury, again, particularly from the perspective of being able to follow and understand what's going on, what's being said to them, understanding the social cues of what is expected of them, the way that they need to present and be serious and be remorseful and respectful to the individuals that they're speaking with, and then the ability for them to be able to express and tell a coherent story.
Sophisticated communication skills are required at every step of the criminal justice process, even for young people who never formally enter a courtroom. A lot of decisions are made from the very first police officer they meet. In all of those interactions, you need to be following this really complex, often abstract, often fast-paced language that's going on around you. And the stakes for not understanding it are extremely high.
Because legal systems are ultimately based around normative social behavior, individuals who can't perform well or quickly or efficiently that normative social behavior are going to be judged more harshly because of it. Kids or young persons with TBI who enter the legal system kind of have two strikes against them. It's harder for them to comply with the normative behaviors that form the basis of laws. And then it's harder for them to use social behavior to navigate the system that is kind of judging them for breaking those laws in the first place.
You know, the assumption is that the person is bad or they're misbehaving or this is deliberate. And when that's not the case with a lot of the clients that I see. But on the street, they're going to come to the attention of authorities much more easily. And I have a client who is a racialized client, so I have a client who's Black and is presenting with neurodevelopmental challenges in terms of their social interaction, their physical expression, saying things that are inappropriate to members of the public, that kind of thing. They're much more likely, obviously, to come to the attention of the authorities. And then that presents other issues. So the client comes into the justice system, is less likely to get bail, perhaps less likely to have people advocating for him or her, more likely to get a more serious sentence. These intersections of, you know, what you look like, how you speak, who you are, who you perceive to be, all come together to be to your disadvantage when you're entering the justice system.
One of the things we know very clearly is that those who are most at risk of being on the streets, dying, or being imprisoned are those who are most marginalized. Who we criminalize is very much determined by the level of inequality experienced. When we look at the end result, we see the adverse impact of discrimination on the basis of sex, race, and in this case, disability, because we see that's predominantly who fills our prisons. It's not those who cause the greatest harm. It's those who have the least opportunity to actually participate in a meaningful way, whether it's in education, whether it's in employment, whether it's in community life. And so we have relegated those individuals oftentimes to the least effective, most expensive system that exists within, and the only one that can't say no, and that is our criminal, legal, and our prison systems.
There are social and environmental factors that are surrounding the lives of all the individuals who come into the system. And the exact same factors that we should care about from a TBI perspective are the exact same factors that we should care about from a law perspective, from a rehabilitative perspective, and from like an equity perspective.
So there's many strategies that one could use to support a young person with a TBI. You can slow down your words so that they have more time to process and to understand what's being said. Information could be written down, paired with talking about it, figuring out what it is that they've understood by maybe relaying to them that you know that you've given them a lot of information, and could they say it back to you in a way that they understood it. I think it's really important to modify the environment so that it's supportive to the young person. An environment that is loud and extremely fast-paced will not support a young person's ability to use strategies such as asking for information to be repeated or to really understand language that's being used. For a young person with a TBI, it's really essential for them to have a very strong support system. And this does include peers and family members and anybody that's important within their environment. Not only do they act as a source of communication support and helping them to understand their world, it gives them a sense of belonging. The risks of negative outcomes increases when young people don't have that social support.
We need to, wherever possible, we need to consider the factors behind the behaviors that led to the criminal sentencing. And we really want to focus on a rehabilitative lens. We want to stop that revolving door trajectory. We want to end the justice trajectory for the youth as soon as possible so that they don't navigate through to the adult justice system.
For a young person with a brain injury, their interaction with the criminal justice system may be the highest stakes event in their lives and may determine the trajectory of the rest of their life. So it's imperative for us to support them so that they have equal access and equal full participation in youth criminal justice, because communication is a human right.
I think you're muted, Caitlin.
Oh, thank you for your patience there. I'm learning Zoom on the go here. So yes, that was the video. Thank you so much for watching. So the next portion that I wanted to talk about was transformation, or this is sometimes called reward, or there's a revelation. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to talk about our response to the video, and then having this now moving forward as a knowledge translation tool. And then maybe some learning points or things, obstacles that we experienced. So Lynn, Catherine, do you want to talk a little bit about the response that we've had so far?
Sure. First of all, I would say that the response has been absolutely overwhelming. I think, one of the things that we wanted to do was to go beyond sharing of statistics and knowledge. And as Caitlin has spoken about, we really wanted to create empathy. And generally, the people that I have shared the video with have been, first of all, floored by the statistics. They've been shocked. They really had no idea, but it has really hit them at a very deep personal level. And these are some comments that were actually shared with me. And the first one, as you can see, actually was from a survivor. So I feel that the response has been overwhelming and extremely positive. Lynn, did you want to share?
No, I'd say the same.
Yeah, I've also had a great response from people that weren't aware of the topic and the statistics. So it felt very meaningful to be able to share this project. And I think, is there anything you wanted to mention about now that you have this tool, like in terms of versus other tools that you might have, or just having a report, like having a video as a knowledge translation tool? How do you feel about that in terms of getting the grant information out there?
Well, this is, I can't speak for Lynn. I would imagine that you would have the same view, and I, of course, want to hear from you as well. I would 100% use this methodology again, over and over, as a means of knowledge translation. And I think it would be really wonderful to also have an opportunity to look at the knowledge uptake and change in behaviors as a result of the video. What's also been interesting, part of our academic world is that we publish papers, we publish reports, but this video, within days and maybe a week of being uploaded onto various social media sites, had been seen by over 3,000 people all around the world. So I think the ability to reach a wide and diverse audience is very significant, and to get the message across. So I'm 100% sold, and as I say, I would definitely use this going forward in the future.
I think, given that we only have a few minutes left, maybe this is an opportunity for us to take questions from our participants, if they have any.
Anyone can feel free to put questions in the chat, raise their hand, and I will let you ask a question verbally, or put a question in the Q&A function if anybody has any.
I'd also just like to say that I know that there's a couple of people who are in the room with us, some whom were involved, another individual who worked with me on a parallel research project, so sort of heard about this sort of vicariously as it was being developed, and then has had a chance to see it as well. So we welcome comments from you as well, in addition to other members who are in attendance, if you have any comments or questions.
While we're waiting, I will add, thank you, Nicole. I will add that figuring out where to put your knowledge translation product in terms of media outlets was a learning point for us. So lots of thinking about where, now you have it, where does it go so that it lives somewhere on a long-term basis. And that was brought really sharply home to us when the government cut the funding for the Ontario Neurotrauma Foundation. So it was no longer, which they did the week we finished the project in February, this past February. So so we had to really think about where is it going to have a long-term home.
And that's a great question that Lisa has also raised. So currently the video is available on YouTube. It's also on the website for a charitable organization entitled the Compassionate Justice Fund for Survivors of Traumatic Brain Injury Among Vulnerable Populations. And to answer the question, are there any plans for integrating it into police training? And the answer is yes. Even though our funding has been terminated for now, we're certainly going to continue doing this work through whatever means that we can. And yes, we will continue to show this video wherever we have the option.
I think another thing I just wanted to mention too about video, not something we've discussed necessarily with this project, but like when the process of creating a video at the end of this, it's a 12-minute video, but I think we had 6 hours of interviews. And so I think when you're investing in the production of a video and recording those things, I think another thing you can think about is how can you extend the creation beyond one video? Maybe you have smaller bits. You put out a 12-minute video, but then you have put out 1-minute video about this specific topic, or you cut it up and have Lisa's section about strategies as just a shorter video that people can consume more quickly. So I think there's also other strategies that you can use with your footage once you have it to extend the life of the.
That's a great point, Caitlin, because we had such an incredible I am cognizant of time, but we had such an incredible meeting with Senator Kim Pate, who is a Canadian senator, and she is a lawyer, and just her work in prison reform, that in of itself could be a very powerful video tool also. So you're right, there's so many rich nuggets within those 6 hours that would be equally as valuable to share.
I just want to make one maybe blast from me at least comment. I think if you do have an opportunity or you're interested in watching the video again, Caitlin made a lot of deliberate decisions about the in-between footage. And so I think, we tend to focus on the interviews, but I think if you also watch the people like skateboarding with no helmets, the shots of the bikes, the shots of the, parts of the city, the fence that looks a little bit like a prison. So I think it's good to recognize that there's actually a tremendous amount of thought by Caitlin on all those decisions as well. And my favorite, which is the survivor is in the middle. The only part of the whole video where there's a person in the middle is the person with brain injury.
Yeah. I think not only did Caitlin create this incredible educational video, but she created a work of art. And so we're just so proud to share this with you today.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I think that's the end of our time here. So thank you everyone for listening to our presentation and joining. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to contact us. I think our contacts are in our speaker bios. But yeah, I'm always happy to talk about this more.
Thank you. Thanks, Rory.
Thanks, Rory.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Rory. That was great.
Yeah, thank you. Would you just be able to let me know? I had a list of the speakers for this next one, but I want to make sure they're correct. Do you know who's speaking in this?
Yes, it's Nicole Bauman.
Okay.
Yeah, we have 4 people who are sort of official, but only 2 of us are able to be here. So I see that Nicole is still here.
Okay, so it's just you and Nicole, or
yes.
Great. Okay, I'm gonna promote her right now.
Perfect. Hi, Nicole.
Hello.
Hi, Nicole.
Hey, Rory. I only know your name because I heard it, but nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Are you with the conference, or are you working with Catherine and Lynn?
I'm with the conference.
You're with the conference. Okay, awesome. Perfect.
Yeah, Rory's just finishing up his MSW at Temple University in Philadelphia. And Nicole is—
Wow, that's amazing. Congratulations.
Nicole's a brand new speech language pathology grad from McMaster University here in Hamilton.
That's great. That's amazing.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
All right. Should I share my screen now? Would that be helpful, just to make sure it works? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Feel free to do that. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. So I had to figure out how to share so I could still see my notes. So give me 1 second.
Yep.
Here. Perfect. And then interview. Okay. Catherine, can you only see the slides now?
Only the slides.
Only the slides. Okay, perfect. That's exactly what I need. Catherine, for the funding slide,
Mhm.
do you want me to read that out or do I just need to
No,
summarize? It's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
And then just for clarity, Nicole, how did you want me to proceed with Q&A? Did you want me to run it or did you want to take care of that?
I think if you could run that, that would be amazing. Just because I can't see it on my screen, I don't think while I'm in presenter view. So yeah, if you just want to, and like anytime that someone has a question, you can just let me know, Nicole, someone has a question. There's a couple times when I've asked for people's feedback. So are you comfortable reading that out or do you want me to close my slides so I can see the chat?
No, I
I
can
can see the chat, Nicole, too. So
Oh, okay, perfect. So do you want to maybe, Catherine, do you want to read responses for like the questions in the presentation? Or do you want Rory to do it? Whatever works best. Oh, you know
so
what?
you mean if people have a question that they've put in the chat?
Yes.
Gotcha. Rory, do you want to do that just since you're sort of the moderator? Just that makes sense? Or I mean, it doesn't matter to me, whatever you prefer.
Yeah, it's
Perfect.
whatever makes it easiest for the two of you. So I can definitely take care of it if that is easy.
Awesome. Okay, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Yep.
And welcome, Celia and Sukman. Thank you for staying on. We appreciate it.
I'm just gonna step away for 1 second before we get started.
Absolutely. Yeah, no problem.
Worries. Catherine, I can't see the time when I have my slides up. So if you just want to let me know when a good time to start it, that would be great. Okay, thanks so much.
Nicole, just as an FYI, it does look like the time is showing up actually on top of your slides, which is
Right there.
yeah. I mean, I'm
cool.
also monitoring, so but just that's a nice
Perfect.
bonus because it's so easy when you're on Zoom and you can't see to kind of
Yes, that helps a lot. So I was
yeah.
worried that I'll get chatting and then we'll go over. So this will keep me on track.
It's an occupational hazard, I think.
Well, should we go ahead and get started?
Yeah.
Or do you want to wait for another minute or so?
Why don't we get started? Rory, are you here? Do you think we should get started or?
That's fine with me.
Okay.
All right, perfect. All right, well, welcome everybody. Happy Monday afternoon, evening, wherever you might be joining us from. My name's Nicole, and this is my partner, Catherine. I'll introduce us in just a few minutes. But I just wanted to say that I am thrilled that you're here. This is my very first conference ever. And Catherine had warned me, you know, I'm not sure. I don't know what this will look like. I don't know if anybody will show up. So thank you so much for being here. And I'm excited, but I'm also the most excited that we get to talk about such an important topic, which is adults who have traumatic brain injury, who are involved in the criminal justice system. So before we get started, Catherine had posted a question just in the chat if you want to take a peek. Just out of curiosity, where are you joining us from? There's only I think 5 of us in this, and I've got some discussion planned. So if you're willing, please feel free to contribute. It's a marketplace, and I want this to be applicable to you. I want to talk about things that we can change, things that we can do better. So please feel free to share your experiences and your ideas and ask any questions that you're wondering. You can unmute your mic or alternatively post in the chat or in the Q&A. Both of those are going to be monitored. So let's carry on. I just have to get my arrow button here. There we go. All right. So before we get started, I'll introduce myself. My name is Nicole Bauman, and this is my partner, Tamsin. We are both recent graduates of the speech language pathology program at McMaster University. We are both now registered speech language pathologists working in the private and the public sectors respectively. And as speech language pathologists, we are registered healthcare professionals, which there are SLPs all over the world, and we assess and treat communication and swallowing disorders. With me today is Catherine. I think a couple of you were joining us from the presentation earlier, but I'll just let her do an introduction for herself.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Nicole. So my name is Catherine Wiseman-Hakes, and I am in Toronto, Canada. I'm also a speech language pathologist and clinical neuroscientist. I'm on adjunct faculty in the speech language pathology program at McMaster University and an affiliate scientist at Toronto Rehab Institute, the Kite Research Institute in Toronto. My program of research, I've worked my whole career in the area of traumatic brain injury, and my program of research for the last quite a few years has been on individuals with traumatic brain injury among vulnerable populations and primarily in the criminal justice system. Now, unfortunately, not all of our presenters could be here today, so I also wanted to take a minute to introduce Dr. Flora Matheson, who will be presenting tomorrow on some other work that we're doing in regard to brain injury in the justice system. Dr. Matheson is a sociologist and from the St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto. And she also teaches in the criminology program at the University of Toronto, and she's with the Dalla Lana School of Public Health. So likewise, she has a program of research in with marginalized individuals in the justice system, and she's a really valued colleague. Well, thanks very much, Nicole.
No worries. Okay, so now that you know a little bit about us, I would love to know kind of what your role is. Are you a police officer? Are you a policymaker? Are you with public health? I want to talk about things today that we can do and strategies that are realistic that we can implement in our practice. And it would be really helpful if I knew kind of what your role is and what kind of information you're here for today. So if you just want to pop that in the chat, I'll just be able to keep that in mind as we continue with the presentation.
Before you move on, I will actually let you know right now we are delighted to have two guests who are joining us, and I know both of them very well. Sukhman Bath is currently a fourth-year student in neuroscience at McMaster, and she was a summer student with us on the grant that was just presented with the video, and awesome. She is also doing her fourth-year research in Dr. Turkstra's lab. So she has very good background in TBI.
Welcome.
And we're also delighted to have Lisa Kakange with us. And Nicole, you may know Lisa. Lisa is currently a PhD student at McMaster in rehab science and is a speech language pathologist and was featured in the video talking about youth with brain injuries and the strategies. So that's the background of our guests at this point.
Perfect. Okay, that's great to know. We won't go into too much detail about TBI then. You guys will be well versed. This was just the funding summary for the research that we're chatting about today. There was a grant by the Health System Research Fund program, and the views of this presentation are of the authors and not necessarily those of the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. All right, so just to kind of give you an overview of today, there'll be a little bit on traumatic brain injury basics, an overview of the prevalence of TBI, the cognitive and social communication impairments associated with TBI, and how that looks in the criminal justice system, and then a great big discussion about strategies and resources that we can use in our own practice as we venture out into the real world. So, traumatic brain injury. Both of you will be very familiar with this. A TBI is caused by a bump, a blow, or a jolt to the head that disrupts that normal function or chemistry of the brain. And we know that TBI severity there can be a range from mild to severe, and that most of the TBIs that occur each year are mild, those concussions. However, we also know that mild does not always mean mild. Approximately 15% of people will go on to suffer from persistent cognitive, physical, emotional, and sleep symptoms over long periods of time. So although they may be classified as mild TBIs, those symptoms can be really severe, and they can significantly change how an individual is able to function in their daily life. In addition, we know that concussions are most often cumulative, meaning that individuals are experiencing multiple mild TBIs, but the more that you experience, the more likely you are to have these persistent symptoms that can be very severe. So, you know what they are? How often do they happen? Probably since I started the last slide, somebody has acquired a brain injury. So the Brain Injury of Canada says that someone sustains a TBI approximately every 3 minutes in Canada and the US. Brain injury is one of the leading causes of death and disability for Canadians under the age of 40 in the developed world. But despite all of this, funding and attention for traumatic brain injury is significantly less than other diseases like HIV and AIDS on an international scale. So before I flip to the next slide, if you would be so kind as to throw a number into the chat, My question is, what do you think the prevalence of TBI is of adults with a traumatic brain injury who are involved in the criminal justice system? Do you think it's 2%? Do you think it's 15%, 60%, 100%? Throw a number in there for me.
And I'm gonna with great affection single out Rory, because I know that our other two in the audience have a pretty good idea of this, but I think this is new information to Rory. So I'm wondering if in your experience, if you want to take a guess. Don't feel pressured.
Sure. My guess would be somewhere. It would have actually been somewhere pretty close to what is in the chat, and somewhere around 25 to 30%.
Okay. So we have 50% from Stukman, and Lisa suggested about 40%. So pardon me, Stukman said greater than 50%, and Lisa said around 40.
Okay, so here it is. 50 to 80% of adult individuals involved in the criminal justice system report a history of traumatic brain injury. Yeah, and Lisa's saying, wow, this statistic often comes as a shock to lots of people that we present to, because it is so staggeringly high. But it doesn't end there. The prevalence of TBI among a sample of prisoners on death row was found to be 100%. And these statistics do not account for the brain injuries that we were just talking about, those mild TBIs, those concussions, because they're so underreported and they often don't require hospitalization. So all of this brings us to the last statistic, which is that individuals with TBI are 2.5 times more likely to be incarcerated compared to the general population. So this population is significantly overrepresented in the criminal justice system. But why does this matter? Why are we here? Why do we care? This matters because for those of you in here right now and in this conference in law enforcement and public health, these are your clients. These are the people that police officers are dealing with on an everyday basis. Women and men who have been assaulted or who have assaulted, people in motor vehicle accidents, individuals with TBI, in addition to comorbidities like mental health, substance abuse, unstable housing. These are the people that lawyers and parole officers and judges are preparing for court, are representing, are making decisions about. And these are the people that as frontline healthcare workers, we see coming into the hospitals who have a loss of consciousness, concussions, mental health. And these are the people that policymakers are making policies about. So it matters because these people are on caseloads. These people are your clients, whether you know it or not. And we need to figure out a better way to support these individuals as they come in contact with the criminal justice system. So where do we start? Well, as speech language pathologists, we know that individuals with TBI often experience social and cognitive communication difficulties and challenges due to brain injury. So let's start off by discussing what those social and cognitive communication challenges associated with TBI could be. What do those look like just in daily life to start off? So this slide here illustrates each of the areas that could be impaired following a traumatic brain injury. So those include communication, social communication, our emotions, cognition, and behavior. So take a peek at that just for another second. And then, like I said, we're going to discuss what these challenges look like in daily life. So we're going to start off with the impact of TBI on social communication. So as most people here are familiar with, social communication means reading other people while you're engaging with them and also reading their mind. So in the past year, I know specifically here in Canada, I don't know if it's the same for you, Rory, or not, but there's been lots of changes to our social communication because we started wearing masks. And now we can't rely on facial expressions to help us communicate with other people. We've also started doing conferences on Zoom And there's a lot of etiquette, social communication etiquette that comes with presenting on Zoom, having meetings, etc. So let's talk about what else is encompassed in social communication. So if you would be willing, can you share in the chat what a typical social interaction might look like at your workplace? So what would this look like? What would it sound like? What would make you comfortable? What would make you uncomfortable during that social interaction? I'll just give you a couple of seconds to think about that and then pop it in the chat for me. We're thinking of just examples of social communication. Perfect. So some people have mentioned some things that we talk about while we're having social interactions. So we often make small talk, right? Some people, we talk about the weather. Sometimes we talk about a show on Netflix. Sometimes we talk about March Madness. So small talk is absolutely one example of social communication. When we're having small talk, we're often looking at each other. We are presenting some sort of body language. We're monitoring our tone of voice. All of these things are encompassed in social communication. Now I just want you to think about what your workplace would be like, what those small social interactions in your workplace would be like if you had a brain injury. And I want you to imagine that these subtle ways that we communicate socially with other people turn out to be so difficult, or can turn to be so difficult for people who have a traumatic brain injury. I know, like in the video that Lisa and Catherine just showed and had a part of, we heard from the gentleman that had lived experience with traumatic brain injury. He mentioned that when people make a joke, he doesn't get it. And that is also encompassed in our social communication. So let's move on. We know that brain injury can have an impact on our social communication, but it can also severely impact our cognition and our thinking. So my first question, if you don't mind posting in the poll again, is to think about how your communication would be impacted if you couldn't remember things well, or if it was hard to pay attention. How would that make it really difficult to communicate? Absolutely. So I was just going to ask, imagine if you couldn't quite remember what my question was. You would have had difficulty even responding to that. And that's what lots of you had said in the chat, right? You might have already forgot the conversation. You would feel left out because you might only be grasping parts, but you can't quite put it all together. And a lot of small in comparison to diving into those really deep conversations. So those were really great examples of how our memory and attention, difficulties with that can impact our cognition and our communication. Question number 2, and I think that you probably sort of already answered this one. In your workplace, how often do you need to follow conversations quickly or have conversations with lots of people? How do you think that a TBI might impact those skills or those abilities that you have right now? How would your life look different at work if it was really hard to follow conversations quickly with lots of people? Yep. So Lisa put in the chat, almost all day, right? Everything would change. It would be so hard. And fatigue, that's a really great contribution, Catherine, and something that wasn't even on my list. And so I think that it's just really important to think about how your own life would change to give you a very small glimpse into what these people are dealing with on a daily basis. So we've covered social communication impacts. We've covered the impacts on cognitive communication. The last one is to talk about the ways that our different forms of communication can be significantly impacted by brain injury. So right now we're talking about listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So I've got 3 questions up here for you. If you had difficulty listening or understanding conversations, how would you feel? I think we just touched on that with fatigue. So my next question is, what daily tasks would you not be able to complete if you couldn't read or write well? This one kind of sent me on a spiral, because once I started thinking about all of the things that I do day to day that require reading and writing, and some of them are the simplest of tasks, it really made me step back and think about how difficult it can be just to get through a day with a traumatic brain injury. Yes, absolutely. Everything as a student would be nearly impossible. Lisa, I like that suggestion, right? Signing permission forms, reading a menu. I had on my list grocery lists, following signs. I went into a COVID vaccine clinic the other day, right? There are signs everywhere about where you're supposed to go and what you're supposed to do. And Catherine brings up a really good point in terms of feeling ashamed. And that is a huge component of brain injury that is sometimes missed, is the stigma and the shame that comes from the fact that it's an invisible disability. It's not a broken arm, you're not on crutches. People cannot physically see this injury and this disability, but it exists. It impacts people's quality of life, but it brings a lot of shame, and that just adds to the complexity of traumatic brain injury. All right, and I think my last question was, oh, this is my favorite one. If you had difficulty explaining yourself, how might this affect you in your workplace or your personal relationships? Think on that one for a second. If you had a really hard time explaining yourself, how might that impact your workplace relationships or your personal relationships? Yeah, absolutely. So, Sukhman just said miscommunication can be bad for work and personal relationships. If you're having difficulty telling a story in a logical order or giving instructions in a logical order, that can be really, really hard. Catherine says that her job relies on spoken and written communication. So that would be very difficult. And likewise, her personal relationships would suffer. So I also got thinking about like grandparents, right? Or parents trying to tell their kids bedtime stories. It can't happen anymore because their kids might notice, right? That, oh, all of a sudden, well, that story didn't make sense, Dad. And so those impacts hit at every level, and they intersect through our daily life and our workplace life as well. So this was just kind of a summary about that really comprehensive list that we just made about how social and cognitive communication impairments can impact our daily life. So we talked about the fact that for social communication, TBI can cause misunderstanding about what is implied versus stated. So sarcasm, jokes, we can miss social cues, perhaps make inappropriate comments for the environment or the situation. Then we talked about cognitive impairments, difficulty following directions and following really fast conversations, paying attention, and processing speed. And last but not least, we talked about the fact that TBI can impact our ability to tell stories in an accurate and a logical way, and to understand complex sentences, vocabulary, or ideas. So let's carry on. I want you to keep this list in mind though, because shortly we're going to be putting these communication challenges in the context of clients who are involved in the criminal justice system. But before we do that, I want to introduce you to some research that explored what social and cognitive communication challenges that individuals with a history of traumatic brain injury who are involved in the criminal justice system identified and perceived to be difficult. So we're talking about their lived experiences. And this was the research aim, as I just said, to explore the social and cognitive communication challenges of a sample of adults with a history of traumatic brain injury and involvement with the criminal justice system. So for this research, we had 8 adult participants. So important to keep this in mind. We know that it's a small sample size, but it was an exploratory study, and it gives us somewhere to start. All of these adults were 18 years or older. They were living in the community, but they have a suspected or diagnosed history of traumatic brain injury and involvement in the criminal justice system. We administered the Ohio screening tool to confirm a suspected or diagnosed history of TBI. They completed socio-demographic questionnaires and qualitative interviews. And then they completed the Latrobe Communication Questionnaire, which is a self-report tool for the perceived social and cognitive communication difficulties. And I'm going to show you that next. So this is the Latrobe Communication Questionnaire. This is what we had our participants fill out. On the left are all sorts of different communication tasks. But what I really want you to know is that the participants were reporting how often or how frequent they were experiencing challenges or difficulties with each of these communication tasks. So it's based on frequency. So after they completed those questionnaires, we calculated the mean and the standard deviation for each of those communication questions. Then we actually compared the mean and the standard deviation scores to a normative sample. And that normative sample were adults with no history of traumatic brain injury and no criminal justice involvement. And then we compared the two, and we analyzed the areas of social and cognitive communication that were challenges for individuals with TBI with criminal justice system involvement. So I'll show you what our data looks like. Here it is. So take a look at this picture. On it, you will see a bunch of dots. The red ones are the participants. Blue is the normative sample. So no TBI and no criminal justice involvement. Higher on this scale is bad. It means that they were experiencing difficulties with communication more frequently. Lower is better because it means that they were experiencing difficulties less often. So as you can see, most of the red dots are high and most of the blue dots are low. And this tells us that the normative sample experiences communication difficulties less often. The difficulties that they experience on a frequency range from never or rarely to sometimes. And this makes sense because sometimes, even though people here do not have a traumatic brain injury and they most likely don't have criminal justice system involvement, sometimes we forget the words that we want to say. And sometimes we still tell stories in an illogical way, or we hesitate and pause and repeat ourselves. So it happens. But the point is that for our participants, the majority of these dots are high, meaning that they're experiencing difficulties at a frequency ranging from sometimes to often, which is more than the normative sample. And what we really want to identify is that even though experiencing communication difficulties sometimes might seem inconsequential, any communication difficulty within any task can have significant implications and negatively impact an individual's experience and participation in the criminal justice system. So let's go on and find out which communication tasks our participants reported having difficulty with sometimes or often. And then we're going to talk about why that matters specifically to the context of the criminal justice system. I'm just going to check the time here. Okay, perfect. So let's carry on. So these were some of the communication the social communication challenges that we discussed earlier. And now we're going to put them in the context of the criminal justice system. So would anybody, I'm going to give you the opportunity just to share in the chat how you think that these difficulties might impact the experience of individuals with TBI in the criminal justice system. What could this mean for these individuals if this is what they're struggling with? They take things literally. They sometimes make inappropriate comments or have inappropriate behavior, and they struggle reading social cues, facial expressions, body language. How might this impact their experience in the criminal justice system? I'm going to leave it with you for a second. Oh, perfect. Sigma already responded. Hard to have interactions with police and other justice system staff. And you hit the nail on the head. These difficulties can negatively impact individuals' experience in the criminal justice system. So, for example, taking things literally means that they might not be able to detect deception, which leaves them at risk for being exploited, abused. When we talk about inappropriate comments or behavior, that might appear as being disrespectful, when really it's a function of the brain injury. And so those are some really great examples of how social communication impacts can have a negative impact in the criminal justice system.
I just want to, I'm going to jump in for just one quick second. Nicole, thank you so much. If you think back, for those of you who were here and saw the video, and the young man commented that often he's laughing when nobody else is laughing, or that if somebody tells a joke, he doesn't get it. So if you think about that, if you're appearing in court and this is your first time in court and you're before the judge, or maybe it's your bail hearing and it's very formal and very serious, and we've heard this from probation and parole officers, court workers, that sometimes the young person or the individual will start laughing, and or they'll just sort of sit there sort of looking sullen and forlorn, and that, without understanding of the brain injury, that comes across like the person is being disrespectful or making a joke of it, and that can result in more serious charges or a higher bail option. So I just wanted to place it in the context of bringing it back to the video.
Thanks so much, Catherine. The next thing that we chatted about, so these cognitive communication challenges are what our participants actually reported having a difficult time with. So some of these examples were needing the other person to repeat what they said before answering them, having delayed or slow responses to questions, hesitating, pausing, repeating themselves, slow reading, writing, or speaking, and also having a really difficult time keeping track of and focusing on the main details of conversations, especially in noisy places. So I'm going to throw this back out to you again. Let's chat about how these cognitive communication impairments could impact an individual in the context of the criminal justice system. Can you think of a point in time in their process involvement in the criminal justice system that this could be a problem? What could this mean for your client if they're experiencing these challenges in the criminal justice system? Awesome. So we had some really good examples there about understanding what their rights are. And we had an example about the Miranda rights, and we're actually going to get into that even more in just a few slides. But you're absolutely right. the context of those interactions, it's stressful, it's fast paced, and oftentimes, if these are the impairments of the individuals with traumatic brain injury, those situations, like Catherine mentioned, those first interactions with the police would be very, very stressful. Catherine, did you want to add in a specific example for this one?
I just think it's also really worth noting Lisa's comment about that situations often escalate, because you're right. The perception often is that the youth is, or the individual is being disrespectful. And because it is such a high stress system, and we often become sort of dysexecutive, we get out of our heads and into our bodies, when it's stressful. So you're not even able to follow even more. So yes, we have heard that physically the situation can escalate and can sometimes result in violence because of it. So really important point.
And just another note that it can often be perceived as non-compliance. And we've kind of already chatted about that and how that can have really negative impacts on the charges that are laid and the consequences that result from those actions. All because if people aren't educated about TBI, they don't have an understanding of the underlying cause of these actions. So, another one in terms of the communication challenges, and we chatted about this already and how difficult it would be if we could not explain ourselves in our work life and our personal life. And our participants reported significant difficulty telling their stories. They reported that they often repeat the same information over and over, that they give people information that's not correct, and that they don't always know the words, or they can't find the words that they need to express themselves. And I think that that was mentioned in the video as well, that the gentleman just mentioned that sometimes he just can't find the names and he can't find the words. And so if these are things that our participants with lived experience of TBI and criminal justice system involvement are reporting, let's think about how this would impact them in the criminal justice system. Can you think of a specific example of when this would be a problem? If their stories are illogical, if they're giving information that's not always accurate, what could be the result of that? What would that look like? Awesome. So we've got talking to lawyers, talking to judges, telling people what happened. In fact, verbal communication is the primary form of communication in the criminal justice system. And from the moment that you are involved, right, the apprehension and the questioning of the police, to discussions with lawyers, court hearings, and then through any sort of restorative or rehabilitation process, it relies on verbal communication. And so at every point in the process, if you don't have the skills, or if your brain injury is making it difficult and challenging to communicate verbally and to tell your story, that can have significant impacts on your participation and also on the consequences that you might endure in the criminal justice system. We also just had a note, it makes them a bad witness to their own story. And I think that that's a great way to put that. And I think that I have in my examples that individuals may actually be, these sort of symptoms can actually be interpreted as the individual being intentionally dishonest or deceptive, which totally impacts their credibility in that moment and later on in the process, for example, in trial. So where do we go next? It doesn't end. So all of these impairments, and we've talked about so many ways that that can impact people within the criminal justice system, but it doesn't stop there. because traumatic brain injuries are also often superimposed on pre-existing language and literacy impairments, meaning that individuals might not have the language skills or the vocabulary necessary to understand the language of the criminal justice system. And I actually want to take you over here. So Suckman had mentioned the Miranda rights in Ontario, which almost everyone is here from except for Rory. We get the right to counsel. And so that would be something similar. I'll let you read through this. This is exactly what police officers say. They have to, or the whole case gets thrown out. They have to say this to every person that they are going to apprehend or arrest. These are the words that they use. They read it to the individual, then ask them if they understand. I want you to throw your thoughts about this in the chat. Tell me what you think when you read this. What do you notice? Okay, on the list already, we've got the language is high level. There are big words, complex language, a lot of questions. And okay, and Catherine says, I would be terrified. How would I remember the phone number? And this is actually something I called my friend who's a police officer on the weekend, and we were chatting exactly about the right to counsel. And from his perspective, he actually mentioned that the phone call, the phone number in this spiel is something that makes people panic. They can't remember it. They know that they can't remember it. They don't have a pen to write it down. And that is the part of the entire spiel that they focus on, that they are not going to be able to remember the phone number. And so that just indicated to me, again, that not only is the language high, but again, the conditions of the communication environment. It's full of pressure. There can be background noise, sirens, cars. There can be biological distractions, and there's emotional stress. There's weight on these decisions, and there may have just been a trauma. And so, again, the level of language can significantly impact people in the criminal justice system who have a traumatic brain injury. And Wasalik and Turkstra summed this up beautifully in their research in 2019, because they said that there is a greater risk of misunderstanding the complex legal language used in these interactions, and it can significantly impair an individual's ability to participate in criminal proceedings. It can hinder meaningful communication with their legal representation and negatively impact conviction outcomes. So let's check out over here. The other thing that I wanted to touch on is that this level of language can significantly increase behavior and frustration on the part of the client. These were two quotes from Lambie 2020. And you'll notice that when we are using communication that is not accessible to people with traumatic brain injuries, first of all, they can feel that shame, right? That comes out again. They agree to things that they don't even know what they're agreeing to, because otherwise they feel stupid. And so just noting that this lack of support for communication accessibility for individuals with traumatic brain injury involved in the criminal justice system is putting individuals in disadvantaged situations, and it's significantly impacting their experience and participation in the criminal justice system. So to sum it all up, we've really chatted about the fact that social and cognitive communication impairments associated with TBI are often misinterpreted as noncompliance, rudeness, defiance, disengagement, substance abuse, when what's really likely happening are comprehension errors, difficulty reading social cues, difficulty telling their story. And so we need to better support these people in the criminal justice system. And right now, we're just going to have a quick brainstorming session about what can we do for these clients. And I'm going to throw it out to the chat. Let's talk about how you think we can support these clients. What are things that we can change in the system? These can be great big dreams. They can be really, really small things that we can encourage frontline people to do. I'm going to open it up. We're going to have a quick brainstorming session, and then we're almost done. Thank you so much for all of your participation up until this point.
Thank you, Nicole. I'd also just say at this point, we'll also open it up to questions too, since we only have 5 more minutes and we do have to end right at 4:50. So if people have questions as well as brainstorming strategies, we're delighted to hear them. And while people are thinking, I would just also like to welcome Tamsin Magor, who's been able to join us. Tamsin was actually working with a client when the session started, but Tamsin is an important part of our research team as well. So welcome, Tamsin. We're really glad you're here. And I just also wanted to say a little bit of a proud moment, because this work was submitted for publication to the International Journal of Language and Communication Disorders, and it came back with a very positive review, and we're currently doing some revisions. But for 2 brand new speech language pathology graduates, they are likely going to have a very important publication and contribution to the literature out of this work. So I'm very proud of them. The other thing I wanted to comment on is that early on, Nicole, made the statement that, TBI is more common than HIV, AIDS, and breast cancer combined, and is the leading cause of death and disability for those under the age of 40, in the developed world, and yet it doesn't receive the funding. And in the last session, we talked about how the Ontario Neurotrauma Foundation was just closed down by our government, and this research program was also shut down by our government. This came before the last research study, so it's really unfortunate. Supman had a great comment here. Yeah, police to write down the Miranda rights, or like have a business card with the phone number. That's an excellent idea. Lisa suggested breaking instructions down into smaller parts, asking them to summarize what they've understood. Absolutely. Oh, that's a good question. How do police read the Miranda rights to deaf individuals? That's a really important ethical conversation, because you're right. That is also a hidden disability, and we do need to ask about hearing too. So these are really, I don't know the answer to that, but those are really great suggestions. Okay.
And I think that they tie in beautifully with what we can do. First of all, we have already talked about reducing the language that we use with these individuals. So not only perhaps can we write down the Miranda rights or take out the phone number, can we just make them simpler? Do we need to ask, you have the right to counsel? Can we just say, do you want a lawyer at this time? And I think that those are really important considerations that we can continue to push for and advocate for to help make communication more accessible. Breaking instructions down, absolutely. Educating our frontline staff who are working with these individuals about TBI and how to communicate with individuals who have a traumatic brain injury. Encouraging frontline health professionals, parole officers, lawyers to start asking questions to their clients. Do you have a history of TBI? Have you had a fall, been assaulted, had a sports injury, been in a car crash? This can give really, really good and valuable information as to how you can proceed with communication. And then you guys brilliantly touched on lots of these. Asking about hearing, absolutely. Speaking slowly, pausing, breaking down those instructions, and also taking individuals into a quiet room so that there's not as many distractions. So in conclusion, I'm going to skip through these ones just to get to the end here. But overall, there are lots of things that we can do in our daily life in the criminal justice system to make communication more accessible for individuals and adults with traumatic brain injury. And we need to do it, and we need to advocate for it because it matters for this vulnerable population in order to allow them to meaningfully participate in the criminal justice system. So thank you so much for all of your participation. That was awesome. Thank you so much, Rory, for moderating, and to my team who put this presentation together. Have an awesome night, guys. Take care. Thank you so much.
Great job, Nicole. It was fantastic. It's really great.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Rory.
you so much, Rory. Thank you.
No problem.